Hello and welcome to the Medicine Mermaids podcast, stories of womb, water, and womanhood. We are your hosts, Naomi Maharaj and Naomi Ring. And yes, we're both named Naomi. Moment of laughter. So, in this podcast, we are here to share real stories on all things women's health, embodied spirituality, and ancient feminine mysticism. We value authentic, sovereign expression, and our greatest hope with this podcast is to awaken the unique medicine that lives within each of you. The title of today's episode is Stories in Our Blood, Lineage, Healing, and Belonging as Third Culture Mermaids. And now we're going to introduce ourselves. I'll begin. I am Naomi Ring, an integrative somatic healer and astrologer, supporting women to embody their wholeness, feel belonging, and root into who they truly are. My main tools are evolutionary astrology, family constellations and trauma healing, and the Akashic Records. I integrate ancient practices, devotional dance, and subconscious reprogramming as well to guide women in their journeys home.
And I'm Naomi Maharaj, a women's holistic health practitioner devoted to guiding women on the path of self-reclamation and embodied sovereignty. My work weaves together body image healing, womb care, and female health through modalities like clinical herbalism, holistic pelvic care, and subconscious reprogramming. I support women like you in remembering the divine beauty that they are and attuning to the deep wisdom and medicine within their flesh. So, welcome to our fourth episode. Naomi and I have an incredible episode that we've prepared for you. And before we get started, we just want to share a few of our intentions because this is such a big topic, talking about our relationship to our ethnicity, our ancestry, our bloodlines, our race, where we call home. And this is, for me at least, and I know for Naomi as well, such a charged topic. And we even came to this episode with a little bit of hesitancy because we know that this is such a charged conversation within the political public space. So we just want to start this episode by sharing a few intentions and touch points before we get started. So we want to acknowledge to everyone who's listening that each and every one of us in the world has such a depth in our ancestry and in our lineage. We have such rich pasts, and we want to acknowledge that because, at least for myself, and I know for Naomi, as we were preparing for this call, we talked a lot about this. Since 2020, it seems like things have gotten a little bit difficult or charged when talking about who we are, our identities, where we come from. And we want to just bring this wave of almost just relaxation, right? Like, we want you to feel safe in this conversation and in this space to be who you are, to be where you come from, to be the unique multi-dimensional being full of nuance and richness to who you are. And we want you to feel safe in being able to claim your ethnicity, to claim your race, to claim your ancestry, to claim the lands around the world that you call home or that you are learning to call home. And we want you to feel like you can reclaim a piece of yourself or many pieces of yourself with this conversation, right? As we're going to talk a lot about our own personal experiences, our own personal ancestries, a theme that we're going to talk about is how we tend to be a mixture of identities all in one, right? Like, you get to be both the colonizer and the colonizee. And I know many people in the world have that story in their blood, myself included. And that brings with it a lot of nuance, conversation, controversy, and we want you to recognize that and be able to breathe with that nuance and to hold space for that nuance. And this work is ultimately for reparation, right? The reason why we're having this conversation isn't just so we feel better in ourselves, right? Feeling better in who we are, but also so we do the work that I personally believe that we came to do here on this planet, which is to repair our lineage and to continue the work of our ancestors, right? We aren't individual beings who just incarnate. We are descendants of ancestors who we carry within our blood. And Naomi and I are also here on this episode because, as you'll see with our stories, we come from such different backgrounds, such different stories, but we carry many similar threads. And it's actually quite incredible how our stories weave together, and we're excited to get
Yeah.
to talk about that. And we know that many people who are listening also carry certain threads that are similar. So that's why we are here recording this episode. So get ready to hear a lot about this topic of who I am, where I come from, my blood, my ancestry, and how that weaves into who I am. So so yeah, let's get started. So, we're going to start this episode giving a little bit of context about who we are and how it has shaped us in this episode. Do you want me to get started?
Yeah, absolutely. I will just say I loved everything you said. That's all. I agree. Super agree.
So, we're going to start just kind of giving a little intro to who we are in case you don't already know. And then we'll each go into more depth of where we came from and how the decisions that our ancestors made shaped who we are today and the experiences that we have been through as young women. So, for myself, Naomi Maharaj. I grew up in South Florida in a town called Boca Raton, an hour away from Miami. And I grew up in a very Jewish town. And I went to a Jewish school in a wealthy city. And growing up, it was very difficult because both of my parents being immigrants, my mom from Brazil and my dad from Trinidad and Tobago, we had our small nuclear family growing up in the US, but my extended family lived all over the world. I have family in Trinidad, in Canada, in the UK, in Brazil. Um, and it was very interesting to grow up in that way and growing up within the context of my school, which is very Jewish, because I almost immediately felt a degree of exclusion for not
Mm.
being, not fitting within that category. We grew up Christian, and so then going to a Jewish school where I'm surrounded by classmates who are reading the Torah together at the synagogue on the weekends and going to Jewish sleepaway camps over the summers. Um,
Oh,
Me and not just me, but the other Christian kids at school, we did feel slightly isolated and unable to merge, and then also being kind of mixed ethnicity, also not being American by birth, but not necessarily culturally American,
yeah.
and being mixed culturally. It was very strange, and there were many things that I kind of learned along the way about being American, and it it took me a while to kind of feel like I fit in. And for most of my childhood, at least until I went to college, I really struggled to feel like I ever belonged or ever fit in. And I never had words to describe that. That was always just a personal feeling in my gut of there's something wrong or different about me. But then at the same time, there was almost this glorification of the fact that I am half Brazilian and half Trinidadian, because it was seen as exotic, or at least my
Mm.
Brazilian side was seen as exotic. Um,
Yeah.
but my Indian side, right, Trinidadian, but of Indian lineage, I was always very confused about that. And when I got to middle school, high school, that's when I started experiencing degrees of racism and bullying, and
Mm.
people, making fun of my last name, which is very Indian, making comments about, my Indianness, making comments about my Indian features. And
Wow.
that was the first time I had ever really experienced racism. So you can see that I'm pretty light skinned. I looked more like my mother growing up. I didn't really inherit my dad's brown skin like my sister. So I really never experienced my race until I got to high school and it was being pointed out to me. When I got to middle school and high school, that's where my body started changing as I went through puberty, and I started really observing that I have more of my father's Indian features. Like my nose changed, my skin started developing acne, and I started really paying attention to how my Indian side was presenting itself in my body. And that's when I also started experiencing racism for the first time and bullying in school, with kids making fun of my last name, making fun of my Indian heritage. And that's when I started to distance myself from my Indian classmates. So I was already feeling disconnection because of the religious aspect, and then and then the Indian stuff came up, and I started to want to be seen as Brazilian, not Trinidadian, Indian. So I used any opportunity I could to point out that I was Brazilian, because Brazilian was seen as exotic, and Brazilians just stereotypically have this, are fetishized for being sexy and beautiful, and so it's easier for me to be Brazilian and to be Indian. And then when I got into my 20s and I went to university, that was when I started really understanding, like, or questioning, what am I? Like, am I Brazilian? Am I Indian? Like, am I white? Am I brown? Am I biracial? I mean, it took me a long time to understand that, I am racially biracial, that my father is brown, my mom is white, even if she is of Brazilian European descent. And I started to have this real question as well into 2020, when there was all of this stuff happening politically, and the term woman of color, person of color, was really politicized. I was having these identity crises of, do I fit in this space? Am I able to go into a space that is for people of color, because I do have light skin, and like, what qualifies me to be a person of color? Is it the fact that I am ethnically mixed, right? Like, I'm Indian, Portuguese, or is it because racially I'm white and brown? Is it because I am culturally Brazilian, Trinidadian? Like, who am I, and what qualifies me? Am I not able to be in the space because of my mom's whiteness, or am I allowed to be in the space because of my dad's brownness? Because I'm sure a lot of people who are biracial experience this. A lot of people tell us what we are, tell you, oh, you're not white, Naomi. Like, I had that experience multiple times. You're definitely not white. Equally, I had many experiences of people saying, you are definitely not brown or of color. And so growing up, it was very confusing. And I think the first time I felt at home in my biracialness was when I discovered one of my favorite rappers, Logic. He's an American rapper who is half black, half white, and he talks a lot about that experience. One of my favorite songs is Black Spider-Man. If you want, take a listen, because it really speaks to my experience growing up. So that was kind of the context of where I came from, and I was so happy to meet someone like Naomi, because even though our stories are so different, and she'll share in a second, there are so many similarities of, like, the who the fuck am I, and what makes me what makes me me. Yeah, so I'll pass the mic over to her so she can share a bit about her story.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say I'm sorry you went through that, especially, I know that bullying and racism can happen in any space when there's someone that seems different. But obviously, I am Jewish, and it makes me very sad to hear that that was your experience in a school that, was predominantly Jewish. And I don't know exactly who bullied you, who didn't, but just, yeah, it just makes me very sad that that would happen, especially from people who are also very much bullied in a way too. So, yeah, and just you living that, I think a lot of people go through these things when they're children, and that has such a deep impact. So it was already hard enough, I think, and that's just it sucks, Just wanted to share that. Yeah, I'll get into my story, but I can say, like, for me, it was always people making comments on the country I was coming from. And it was so funny because, yeah, I once got laughed at, and they're like, oh, gringa, gringa. And I'm like, I was born in Argentina. Like, I'm not American. Why are you calling me gringa? Like, and it's all because of the color of my skin. Because, well, right now I'm fucking red, but I'm technically white appearing. Um, so and then yeah, that's a whole topic, but I'll just give every listener now a little bit of my background and understanding of my story. So I was born in Argentina, and most of my family is still living there and has lived there for either one or two generations before me. I will get into later, like, where everyone is from, because my family has, like, just all these different nationalities. And I can just begin by saying I'm ethnically Jewish. That's my lineage. On all sides, we are Jews. And maybe you could give us the title of Wandering Jew, which is like an archetype, of how we have just crossed times and lands and just wandered around. It's like an uprooting, and there's just this sense of not where is home, but what is home in the end of the day, because the where it's just so many places you don't understand in the end. Where do you come from? And that, was also added on afterwards, like more layers of that, because by the time I was 6 years old, I began moving with my parents. And it was, luckily for me, not the same reasons as for my ancestors, but it was still, I lived in like five different countries before I turned 18. By now it's seven. I moved countries 10 times before I was 18, and it was like repeatedly. So it was from Argentina. By when I was six, we moved to the US, and I lived 1 year in Boca Raton. So it's the city where Naomi is from, Naomi Maharaj. And and then from there, I moved to Chile. I lived there for 1 year. And then I moved back to the US. I lived in Miami for 4 years. So I was still near Naomi, 1 hour away. So cool that our timelines cross like that. And after 4 years there, by that time, I was like almost 13. We moved again to Chile. I lived there for a year and a half. And after this like mega earthquake, 8.8, like super traumatic event, we moved to Uruguay. I was there for half a year. Then I finally chose, I was about to be 15. I was like, that's it. I cannot take this anymore. I do not trust my parents to stay in one place. And I chose to go to a boarding school in Israel. That's my ancestral homeland. And that's where I felt I needed to go. I found a program that was for free. I was like, guys, you don't have to pay for anything. I can be independent. Like, I was so excited. I just really wanted to stop moving and be in one place, and mostly be in an environment where everyone was gonna be the new kid and not just me. And we were all gonna be new. So I was like, oh my God, for the first time ever, I'll be new, but everyone else is gonna be new too. And that excited me. I can't express how much. After a year and a half, though, I moved back to Uruguay, where my parents were. They moved away half a year later to the US, and I stayed finishing high school with my brother. He had already been done. He was 21, I was 17, and he took care of me so that I could finish high school in Uruguay, a country where I have no family. And yeah, it was, I grew up in basically over 15 different homes. And so, yeah, for most of my life, the question really wasn't where is home, but it was mostly like, what is home? What is this? Like, where do I feel at home? And who are the people I feel at home with? And where can I say I come from? Because it was just this huge confusion of like, if someone, you meet someone, they're like, where are you from? And I'm like, immediately triggered. I just don't know how to answer that. I don't know what to think, what to say, what to identify with. And everyone identifies with their nationality, at least, as I was growing up, that's what I felt. People could easily be like, oh, I'm American, I'm Brazilian, I'm from Colombia, I'm from here. I'm like, even, of course, there's exceptions, but even sometimes when you have, for example, like Naomi, she has like family from Brazil, and then the other side is like Trinidad and Tobago, like, from the Indian lineage. I feel like if I have to even explain my sides, it's like, well, I'm Austrian, English, Polish, Ukrainian, and Turkish. And before that, I don't really know because they were wandering around, and maybe we passed through Italy, and maybe it was the north of Africa, and like, it's just very, I'm like, I don't really know. All I can say is I'm Jewish. Like, and that didn't come until like the last 2 or 3 years where I feel like I grab onto that because otherwise I really have no clue what I would answer. Like if I hadn't understood that that's my ethnicity and that's my lineage and that's like the anchor and the thing we all have in common in the family, then I really had no idea. I, at some point I did start saying I'm Latin American too, because I grew up in Miami and in many countries of South America, but I felt like, well, I have a little mixture of like, the Mexican flair and the Brazilians and my Colombian friends and then my Cuban friends and like, all these different flavors that I received growing up in such a rich environment of, immigrants and international people. that it felt like, oh, maybe I can just say I'm Latin American, you know? Um, so yeah, like it's very complex, and so I totally hear you. There's just it's difficult, and like you said in the beginning in the intro, we are in some way all like colonizers and colonizees. Like that's just how it feels because I'll enter a space and I'm the immigrant, you know, I'm the one that's coming. This is not my land. Like now I live in Costa Rica. I'm white appearing, right? Like I easily look like the colonizer anywhere I go. No one ever knows where I'm from. Even today, I met someone at the river and he's German and he was like, "Oh, you're American." I'm like, "No." He's like, "Oh, Canadian." No. And he's like, "Oh, you're German too." I'm like, "No." He's like, "Okay, you're South African." I'm like, "No." I was like, "How'd you?" And I told him like, "You can keep guessing, but I can also tell you. You tell me when." And I told him, like, I'm not from an English speaking country, just so you know. I know it won't look like it because I don't appear to be maybe from like any other place, but it's not English. And he's like, "Oh, you're Italian then." And so, yeah, I ended up obviously sharing, poor guy. I was like, "Well, I'm Argentinian." I just don't look like probably any place either. It's very difficult to pinpoint me. People have told me like, "Oh, you're Brazilian." And I'm always like, "Me? Brazilian? Really?" Like, or like, "Oh, you're Greek?" I have my fun, I laugh, but in the end of the day, it's just again a reminder to me of like, yeah, I'm a child of this world, and I know it's gonna bother some people, but that's just my reality. That's how I grew up. That's how all my family, like, home has always been movement for us. Like that's what I got. I'm an easily adaptable being that will land somewhere and feel at home, whether it was for my own survival or because I really just my soul feels at home, and I I just know that it's a heart sensation and it's about who I'm with and stuff like that. So yeah, the what I can share though is that this I will get a little astrological here. Like I know that on one hand, I'm super adaptable. I'm that Gemini rising. I love like meeting new cultures and I'm super curious and I'm very grateful for how I grew up. And then there's that side of me that always desired stability, that Leo Taurian energy that's like fixed. I want my stability. I want my nervous system to be calm. I just want to know that I'm in one place, that my home is stable, that I can like be there, I can rest. Please don't move me. So yeah, I have both inside of me, and I mean, there's just too many stories, but all I can say is, like I shared in the beginning, what I experienced was just a deep confusion. I was always switching languages too. I was in some way what they call code switching, because in some way or another, you're the new girl, you have to adapt to the culture. If it's different, you have to try to fit in. You don't have to, but I sure wanted to. I wanted to belong. I wanted to be loved. I wanted to have friends, and thank God I did. I'm very grateful for all the friends I had along my way. But I definitely received my fair share of comments. I don't know if I would call it racism, but I was judged for being Argentinian, and in my head it was like I only lived there until I was 6. I was judged for being a gringa, and I was like like I was judged for all these different places, and then obviously now as an adult, it's like this fear of being like I'm a Jew, I'm Jewish. Like, is that okay? Can I say that? Like it's just that energy of, especially in the last 2 years, with all the political tension and feelings, it's just very scary because that one thing I had that kind of defined me and gave me a sense of belonging and identity felt like, oh, it's very dangerous now. If I say this out loud, I'm gonna like be excluded, or even worse, like there's just people beating each other up. Like it's just very, like, it can be physical too, it's very, yeah, it's a bit scary, I would have to say, to even call Israel my ancestral homeland. If it can feel very scary. So yeah, I sometimes have this feeling of like, I don't know what to tell you guys. What do you want me to be? Because you're gonna be like, just go back where you came from. And it's like, well, that's gonna be very, very difficult, you know? So, yeah, I grew up with a very rich cultural, like, environment. And also within my home, like, my parents just shared with me so much richness that it's just who I am. I have no way to be something else, and I have no way to go back to one single home either. So I guess that's what I can say as an opener. Moving is basically part of my whole personality, and I'm just that girl, you know? I'm just that girl who has this this international identity in a way, and that's pretty much it for now.
Yeah, I even though, our stories are different and I haven't
Yeah.
moved, 15 times, I really resonate with the who am I? What is it that you want me to tell you? Because I'd have
Yeah.
many people ask me, "Where are you from?" And I say, "I'm from the US." And they're like, "But where are you really from?" And really
Mm-hmm.
similar, like, "Are you Greek? Are you Brazilian? Are you Italian? Are you?" And I tell them and they're like, "Oh, okay, but your name is Indian." And I'm like, well, yeah, there's that part too. Like, ethnically, I'm Indian. And so I would spin myself into circles, being like, really just over analyzing the question, where are you from? Right? Like, what does that mean? Is that a cultural question? Is that an ethnic question? Is it a racial
Yeah.
question? Is
And
it a
are we
question of
making a big
birth?
deal? Because I've received
Right.
that too. Like, why are you making it such a big deal? Just say you're from Argentina. Like,
Yeah.
it's like, but how do you want me to,
Yeah, because
like,
for one person, they
how
may
do
be
you want me
asking you
to?
where you were born, but someone else may be asking you where you
Yeah.
are from ethnically. And so I totally resonate with that question. I remember when I was a
Mhm.
little kid, I would be, writing my PSATs, because growing up in the States, it seems like you're just constantly filling your name into little bubbles. And
Oh,
I remember
yeah.
there would always be this little box that wants to do research on the kids in the United States taking these stupid little tests. And there would be a question about where are you from ethnically, and the
I
options were
remember.
always Pacific Islander, Native American, Latino, Hispanic, white or other, black, white or other. And
Yeah.
I would be like, that box makes zero sense to me because you're
Zero.
mixing race with color, with ethnicity, with
All of them
and
together.
like all of I would always put other, or I would always like right, Southeast, I would put like Native American, even though that wasn't really the case, because
Yeah.
when I was little I was like, I'm Indian, so Native
Yeah.
American Indian, until I realized that those were completely
Valid.
different things. So
Yeah.
basically I just had this existentialist crisis until I got to university, I think.
I get you, because the 4 years I lived in the US, it was in elementary school, but even in elementary school, you have to fill that Hispanic or other or all the ones you mentioned. And I remember asking my mom one day, like, Mom, what do I put? Because she's like, I told her like I put Hispanic. She's like, you're not Hispanic though. I was like, but I was born in South America. She's like, but you're not Hispanic. I'm like, okay. So do I put other? She's like, well, what other option is there? I'm like, white. She's like, well, you're white. I'm like, am I? Like, is this so it's my color? Like, that's what I am? Like, it was just very confusing. I'm like, why is there no like Jewish or I don't know, like how does this work? It was I so resonate with that, just I think my fear though, growing up this way, was like, will anyone ever relate to me? Like, will anyone ever understand me? And it's funny because growing up now, like now, I understand how many people actually understand us. But like back then, it just feels so isolating. It's like, you almost feel like you're the only one in the world and everyone else has it figured out and you're like the only one having these issues. I don't know, maybe that's just me and how I felt because it felt just so extreme and maybe everyone around me was so chill, but I was just, you're a 6-year-old girl and you're having all these questions and every year it just gets bigger and bigger. All these questions just get more massive and you're like, well, I don't see anyone else sharing all this about me. So for me, this is so healing to like have these conversations with people and realize that it doesn't matter if they have my story or not. Everyone has their own story, but we all go through feeling isolation and not belonging, right? Like yeah, that's so real, basically.
I remember one time when I was maybe 13 or 14, I picked up this Time magazine article, and on the front cover, it was talking about a study that was done that was showing what kids or what would be the racial composition of the United States at 2050. And it showed some percentage, something like 50% of Americans would be biracial. And they were like showing images of what those people would look like. And they were beautiful images of racial mixes that I had never seen before that I thought was so beautiful. I saw this like African woman with red hair and blue eyes. And I saw this like all these beautiful ethnicities that were mixed. And that was the first time that I looked and I saw like, whoa, I'm biracial and there are so many people who are biracial and this is our future. Like people who are mixed, that is the future of humanity and that is such a beautiful thing. And so to, comment on what you were saying, like, does anyone else get what I feel? I think yes, and I think increasingly so. And in a second, we're going to talk about the third culture concept, right? And how so many of us have experienced something like that. I think now might be a good time for us to kind of dive deeper into our bloodlines, right? So the title of this episode is The Stories of Our Blood. And one of the biggest points we want to make is that we aren't, individual human beings just kind of doing our thing in this life, right? We are products of our ancestors. We are products of the decisions our ancestors made, and neither of us would exist without those decisions. And
Mm-hmm.
Naomi and I want to share a bit about that to give context to our story, right? Like I didn't just end up in the United States, born in Boca Raton. Like that was a choice made by many people, and the life that I live was a choice made by many people. So,
Yeah.
for me, for example, I've shared, a bit so far in this episode, but my mom is from Brazil, of Portuguese and Spanish descent. Somewhere in the late 1800s, early 1900s, my great great grandfather and his wife moved from Spain and Portugal and settled in Minas Gerais, which is a state in Brazil. And from then on, my grandparents were born, my mother and my aunts and my cousins were born, and they identified as being Brazilian. And I think it's cool to acknowledge just the difference between American culture, which is very much about segregating people of different countries and different races, from Brazil, which tends to just draw people from many parts of the world and to claim it as part of the national identity. And so many Brazilians are Portuguese, are Spanish, are Italian, are German,
Yeah.
are African, are Japanese, are Lebanese, and they're kind of incorporated into Brazilian national culture. So my mom didn't grow up thinking she was anything but Brazilian. My grandparents didn't think they were anything but Brazilian. And so then from my dad's side, my dad is third generation Indian. And the story is it's really powerful. So as the story goes, told by my grandmother, that we were visiting family in a different part of India. We were originally from Varanasi, and we went to Calcutta. And on the way back, we were tricked onto getting onto the wrong ship. Rather than going back to Varanasi, my ancestors were taken to the East Indies, to Trinidad and Tobago, where at that time it was a British colony, and the British Empire was no longer recruiting or stealing slaves from Africa, and they were bringing indentured servants, laborers from India to the East Indies. And because Indian culture already had this caste system, which was a form of
Mm.
social order, they took advantage of that caste system and brought indentured laborers, from different castes to maintain that social order within Trinidad and Tobago. So my ancestors, as at least as far as my grandmother says, we were Maharajas from the priestly caste. So we were involved in, holding the puja ceremonies and the religious ceremonies that the higher castes would do. And so then when we were taken to the East Indies, we were given parcels of land, and in return we were supposed to control the lower castes and to be involved in that. And indentured labor with quotes, because they weren't being paid. It wasn't really ethical. It sounded nice on the outside, but the reality of it, it was very much just like slavery. And so my grandmother, she was arranged to be married when she was 9 years old, and my grandfather was 11 years old. It was a totally different time. And she moved into her husband's home, my grandfather's home, as was custom at 16 years old. And they started having babies, right, like in the middle of the countryside in Trinidad and Tobago, until my grandmother, she broke the custom, which was to, live in the family of her husband's family. She said, "No, I am not going to raise my kids in the middle of the countryside. I want them to have an education, which I didn't get to have." And so she went and she took the few children that she still had, and she went back to her family's home in San Fernando in Trinidad, and then she ended up having the rest of her kids. She had 9 children, and my father was the last one. And because of that decision that she made to defy what was, a cultural custom, she defied what was expected of a woman at that time in the 30s, 40s in Trinidad and Tobago. She ended up allowing being able to have all of my aunts and uncles get an education in town. And in the end, many of them, if not all of them, left Trinidad and Tobago to go to Canada, to go to the UK, to go to Scotland, to go to the United States. And they were all nurses, doctors, engineers. And so when my father was 16, he was put on a ship, my grandma, and she said, "You're going to be a doctor. You're going to go live with your eldest brother who is, married in his late 30s." And he went on the path of being a doctor. And so in this weird backwards way, the fact that Trinidad was a British empire gave my father an opportunity, but at what cost, right? Did he actually have the choice to get a British education, or was that what was expected of him, or, kind of reparations for my ancestors being ripped from their homeland and being taken somewhere completely new? So my father, he, throughout his journey, he lived in the UK for many years. He got trained, became a doctor, was a workhorse, moved to the United States, where he then met my mother at a conference. And
Wow.
then their life kind of, my mom was brought to the US because of my father, who moved to the US for more opportunities. And that was the beginning of my story. And there were so many decisions that led to my whole entire existence. And if my grandmother hadn't sent my dad to the UK, would he have met my mother? Would I have been born? If my mother didn't go through certain experiences, gone to that specific ASH meeting, right? A medical conference in Miami, would she have met my father? Would I be here, right? Each and every one of us has some version of those decisions that shaped the person who they are and shaped the experiences that they lived growing up. So that is the story of my blood that wanted to share itself today. And Naomi, I would love to. We've already spoken a bit, before recording this, but I think
Yeah.
our listeners would love to hear kind of what were the things that your ancestors decided that made you
Yeah.
brought you here.
Yeah, I love that question because even I will quickly mention, like, just in family constellations, we always want to acknowledge these things. Like, for example, my father had a first wife, and my mom is the second wife. And even just that, like that first wife is part of my system, my family system,
Yeah.
because if it hadn't been for her leaving, right? If her and my dad don't decide to get a divorce, I don't exist. Just that like acknowledgement of all these decisions, like you mentioned, that our ancestors, that our, parents, grandparents, great grandparents were making, is the reason who we are, is here. And that is huge. And I just love that. I love that we're having this conversation. So, through my lineage, it's honestly, like I mentioned before, that so many lines. I don't want to make this confusing for any of the listeners. So I'll do my best to share, some bits and pieces here. I did inherit a lot of like displacement, disconnection from family ties, grief, like that was unspoken, as many families who are, Jewish come like with, basically fleeing or coming from like, yeah, trying to find where they can root and not be displaced again, where they won't live through pogroms, right? Or like anti-Semitism, whatever it is. And basically, all of my great grandparents um, and their parents, all of them basically arrived to Argentina. They all chose Argentina, even though we're talking about one coming from Turkey, one coming from Ukraine, which back then was probably Russia, right? Like today, Kiev is part of Ukraine, back then and how everything was divided. We're talking about early 1900s. Could have been Russia. I'm not sure. Please fact check me. So when I say I'm Ukrainian, it can either be Ukrainian or Russian, just so you know. Um, and yeah, because lands have been just like the lines, right, of lands have been like rethought often, especially around Europe in these times in World War One, World War Two. So yeah, and then the Austrian English side and the Polish side. So basically, I think the most important thing to share is, and I'll share some stories, but they all chose to go to Argentina even when it wasn't their first choice. And that is the reason why I'm here, because they all had to meet there, right? Like on my mom's side, she's half Turkish, half Ukrainian, Russian, whatever we want to decide on. And and yeah, these set of people needed to arrive and meet in Argentina, right? Like, so to me, that's incredible. On my mom's side, like basically the father of her mom, so my great grandfather, he spent first a year in a Jewish, um, like, I guess we could call it like a town in China where Jews would go to. He first spent a year there before taking the boat to Argentina because he was fleeing from World War One, and yeah, him and his brother spent a year first in China and then decided to take the ship to Argentina. So that to me is incredible because they could have stayed. Then it's too many people, so I'm trying to get my facts straight about who's who and who came how. I can share that on my mom's side, the Ukrainian, Russian, sorry, I don't really know what to call it by now. Kiev, the ones that came from Kiev. They some stayed. My mom has a cousin. They had to change their last name. My mom's like for my mom's side, my grandmother's maiden name is Portiansky, and apparently that's very Jewish. So they changed it very slightly to Portniansky. There's almost like no difference, but it made a huge impact because, they had to hide to be able to like light the candles in Shabbat and, just follow their customs and traditions. They always had to hide and they kept on living just, as in some way as people who are being persecuted. And that's just very strong to hear, because luckily for me growing up and my family, like they were able to find community in Argentina and like you said about Brazil, be absorbed. I think a lot of my family by now considers themselves Argentinian, like they are really from there. They have all the customs and traditions also of Argentinian people, even if I didn't grow up that way. Like, they drink the mate and they have like the social like aspects, the culture. And even for me, like we are Argentinians in all the ways that matter. And yeah, my mom's side settled like in north of Argentina, in the border with Brazil, in an area like very near to the Iguazu Falls. And for my dad, they settled more like in Buenos Aires, the capital city. And on his side, I have basically, it was my great grandfather on his side who, from his dad's side, basically, who at age 1 was taken from Austria to England by his mom. She decided to leave behind her husband and move with her 1-year-old child to England. And from there, when he was 10, they arrived to Argentina. And this man, I mean, my great grandfather, he arrived, he was an Englishman, even though they were coming from Austria. Like he was raised in the English way. As soon as he arrived, he was only 10 years old, but he tried to find a job with the ferrocarril, the trains. Like all the English men were like arriving to Argentina, going to work with the train. And yeah, he worked with Henry Ford. When he was 15 years old, he was hired by Henry Ford to be his assistant to open, like, Henry Ford had just created the first car. It was the T, I forget now what it was called, but the
The Model
something
T.
T, Model
The Model
T.
T.
Yeah. And so he hired my great grandfather to, be the one to bring this to like Argentina and like be the, I don't know what to call it in English. I'm sorry, guys, I'm having this blackout, but
The
basically,
representative. The
the
representative.
representative, thank you. He was he was being the representative and he translated the manual from English to Spanish. So like the translation of the first car's manual from English to Spanish is by my great grandfather, and that's why there's many words that just did not make the cut and they're in English still because he did not find a translation. And by the year 1938, he took a boat and quit. He told Henry Ford he's an anti-Semite. It was about like the whole, World War II, Holocaust was all beginning, and he decided to quit. And yeah, from there, like he continued, doing other things, having his own business. He sent my grandfather on boat to study in England as well. And back then, you would have to sail for 3 months, like one way. And my grandfather came back from studying midway. He studied engineering, both like mechanical and civic, and he was homesick and missed his mother, and he took a boat just to come back and visit, and my great grandfather did not let him come down. He was like, you go back and finish your studies and then you can come and say hi to your mom. And so he spent basically 6 months on the sea because he didn't get to come down. He just had to go straight back, which is crazy. Like these stories are crazy. Yeah, also on my dad's side, not gonna bore you with who's who because it's a lot, but like my family was able to escape basically from Poland by a man who was willing to hide them under like hay in his truck, and they were feeding, like they were eating only bread basically, thanks to my uncle, like my dad's uncle. Like he would um we talked about this and I forget the word again, but he was basically like, how in the military you have to like take yourself through
Trudge.
um
Trudge through.
trudging, crawling, whatever, trudging through the mountains in Poland in the winter to reach like an aunt who was in a better economic position to get some flour so that they could have, you know, bread to eat. And one day, finally, after my great grandfather had enough money, he sent them tickets to come to Argentina as well. So it was my great grandmother and her 4 children. And they escaped by being hidden, in this like truck with the hay. And then my great grandmother hid herself in the train in Italy, in a bathroom stall with her 4 children so that they could safely make it to the ship that was leaving for Argentina. So a lot of stories like this basically that live in my lineage. There's just many, many more. Um, but I'm just very grateful that they all found a place of refuge, that they all made it. And there was a lot of being hidden, there was a lot of like on my mom's side as well, having to hide and, to not be raped or whatever it was, trigger warning, I'm sorry. But, very harsh stories like that I feel like so many of us have and carry in silence many times that we don't even know of, that live in our blood and that shape who we are, whether we know it consciously or not. So yeah, my ancestors basically came from all these different countries. They all merged and met in Argentina, and from there the story goes on. My parents met when my father was getting his divorce, and my mom is an accountant, so they just happened to meet in the office. And it was like love at first sight, how they tell. And the first thing my dad did, their first date, was my dad taking her to all the places where he grew up, where he ate his food. Like he even took her to like his mother. Like my dad had this urge to tell his story and where he came from. And I just find that so beautiful. Like it's a lot. It's an intense first date. I'm like, how did you guys, like mom, like really? Like but also how incredible. because that it just shows how much we have a need and desire to tell our stories and to share with another our history, what's important to us. And I love that my dad did that he felt this is my woman. I already know it from the second I locked eyes with her, and now I'm gonna just share with her everything that's dear to my heart, where I played with my brother when I was little, like all the things, Naomi. Like it was incredible when my mom tells it to me. So yeah, I have many more. I wanted to share like one bit, but I think that's for our next section anyways. So I leave it here. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, I think for those who are able to follow with both of our stories,
Yeah,
thank you for being here. Hope you're still
definitely.
intact in one piece. Um, but I think there's such beautiful stories, and I think the common thread is this feeling of like multiple lineages coming together to make us and who we are. And Naomi, I'm curious if you resonate with this. Like for myself, I felt like many broken lineages for a long time. And at least the journey of my 20s has a large piece of it has just been how can I recreate my lineages again? How can I
Mm-hmm.
find the pieces that were taken from me, right? For a while I just had this anger towards, British colonialism and what they did to my family,
Yeah.
right? They took us from our home. It wasn't our
Yeah.
choice, right? And now we're Trinidadian, and then we're also, because of the poverty there, we've also had to find
Yeah.
another way to live and move in different countries. And, my dad's journey in the United States is not an easy one either. I think it's important to note that this conversation of this rupture in lineage also isn't for people who have so many, mixed bloodlines, lineages like Naomi and I, because I've simultaneously have had a lot of, white American friends tell me, Naomi, like, I'm not like you though, because I'm white. My family has been here for a long time. Like, we're maybe German or Italian, very distantly, Irish, very
Yeah.
distantly, but my lineage is even farther away. I don't know my story. I don't know who I am. Like, I can't even begin to repair my lineage. You at least have pieces of your puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to
Mm.
speak to that person because I know that there are a lot of people who feel that way and
Yeah.
on some level think that their stories are less valid to piece together, right? Because
Mm.
of the context around at least in the United States, people who are white skinned. And
Totally
I
get
just
it.
want to say, because maybe my stories are closer to my generation than maybe yours, but we
Yeah.
all have songs in our blood. We all have ancient family recipes in our blood. We all have, crazy stories like Naomi, where her great grandfather was working for Henry Ford, like
Yeah.
on some level throughout time. Maybe it's one generation ago, maybe it's 10, 15,
Yeah.
20, 30 generations ago. But I think that this conversation is valid for everyone. And I really hope that that point is like really driven through, that all of us
Yeah.
have ruptured lineages, all of us have lineages. But I think, as we'll talk about in a moment with like the belonging, Naomi and I, that I hope you take away from this episode too, that we don't have to go on this quest either. We don't have to go on this like decade long quest of finding who we are to feel at home
Yeah.
within ourselves and within our blood. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, it's just not part of some people's journey sometimes. Like you're maybe consumed with other things, you have other things you deal with or like question about. Like we all come with different question marks in our heart, I love to think of that. Like, and I think your words are super wise here, sometimes people really do feel a lot of this connection from this kind of like, oh, the lineage, because yeah, they'll maybe not feel validated enough. And I can just share, if it helps anyone to hear, that sometimes I don't even feel validated enough. Like I just really don't. Like, yeah, I really, really sometimes I'm like, what am I even talking about? Like I think it's so fair, but I think it's so important um to validate ourselves and just know that we all come from somewhere. Our families, no, like there's this guy, if you haven't read Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl. I know that in the US they make you read this book at some point, maybe.
I
Maybe
never
you've
read.
all heard of it. Maybe they don't make you, but I knew it was in my curriculum, and either way I would have read it. He says like he basically teaches like we can't really compare suffering. There's no such thing, like everyone goes through their own experience and we all feel things like differently. So there's no such thing as someone being more valid than the other. Like I just feel that way at least. That's my kind of nuance there where it's like all of this is complex, all of this can be um sometimes very, what's that word that we use? But yeah, like it can bring so much discomfort to talk about when you're in front of someone who maybe has this error feeling like my story is valid and yours is not, or something like that. And we're not at all coming from there. Like, we definitely invite you to just hear, I don't know, even if your whole family has been in one place, that's rich, that's beautiful, and I'm sure they still have so many stories to share. And yeah,
Yeah.
it's it's important to know that.
Yeah, and I think
Mm.
if you're drawn to the Medicine Mermaids podcast, if you're drawn to Naomi and I, on some level you are a kind of mermaid, right?
Mm.
And a piece of our episode is the Third Culture Mermaids, and
Yeah.
I feel like it's a good time to bring this up. The term third culture, I don't know if you've heard of it before. Third culture individual, third culture person. I only ever learned this term when I was at university, and I went to a school that was also really international, and there was a third culture club, and it's basically a club for kids who were third culture, meaning that they are of multiple different cultures, either because their parents are expatriates, immigrants, and living in a different country, so they could grow up with at least three or four different cultures, one for each of their parents, and then one for
Yeah.
the country that they grew in. And there was kind of this feeling of belonging and community within one's non-belongingness, right? This feeling of I'm not really Brazilian, but I'm also not really Trinidadian, but I grew up in the States, right? That kind of feeling, that is a feeling that many people or kids around the world have, and they fit within this world culture of third culture. And when I learned
Yeah.
about that, I was like, frick, I have never met anyone who is third culture but myself. So this was really amazing, and this wave of relaxation passed over me when I went to a third culture kid
Yeah.
club meeting. I didn't continue just because I didn't want to, but I wanted to bring that up in case there's someone out there who hasn't heard of this term before.
Mm.
And I think with the mermaid, like we're calling us third culture mermaids because there is a certain longing in the soul, I think, of a person who's a mermaid,
Mhm. Yeah.
Whether you see the term mermaid as like fun and playful, or if you like deeply vibe with the soul of a mermaid, which Naomi and I do, or else this wouldn't be the Medicine Mermaids podcast. I think there's something with that because, like mermaids, for example, they live in the sea, and while on land we have countries, and we have territory, we have continents, we have division, we have borders. In the ocean, yeah, we have the seven seas, but who made that up? It was man. There is no line on the bottom of the ocean floor that says this is the Indian Ocean, this is the Pacific
Yeah.
Ocean, this is the Atlantic Ocean, right? So as mermaids, we feel connected to all places, right? We're all of this world is our home because we're connected by water. It's a
Yeah.
water planet. So back in the day, when we would travel, our ancestors traveled by water. Now we travel by air, and we're connected to the that air element
Yeah.
with movement. But back in the day, it was via water that our ancestors moved to new countries, walked to new lands, and even in the waters of our body, that's where we carry the ancestral memory of who we are. All the stories that we've been sharing live in the blood, in the waters of our blood. And I think, coming back to the third culture mermaid, like we we feel at home in all of these places, but it's the waters of the place that really connect us there, whether it's actual
Yeah.
waters that we swim in, or whether it's the memory of that place that we feel connected to. And like I was saying, there's no such thing as seven seas. It's one sea. And what connects every one of those places that we call home, right? For me, Brazil, Trinidad, India, Scotland, the US, right? All what connects all of those places is water. What connects all of the countries in your story is also water. And I think that
Yeah.
we get to lean into that and identify with that. And I think we are coming to a time where we're starting to identify less with nationality, right? Maybe that's part of why we have felt so confused about who we are. Am I Brazilian? Am I Indian, right? Because we're moving into a time
Yeah.
of identifying less with a country and a nationality and identifying with the consciousness of our planet. We are, our
Yeah.
home is our planet. Our home is Gaia,
Yeah.
right? Our home is the consciousness of this being, this watery planet called Earth. And I think that many of us are experiencing this so that we can make the shift, right?
Exactly.
Identify less with our country and more with our home.
Yeah, and know that our roots stretch far beyond any borders, like for me, it's very much about where my heart belongs and who are the people I love and how I feel at home with them. And being, belonging is a spiritual act. It's not a political one. It's not about a passport. It's about your presence and where you feel also received and connection. And so I feel a lot of us that are maybe more open-minded can also remember you said, there's no such thing as the seven seas. There's no such thing as seven continents either, or however many you're taught, because that's also funny. In some schools, I was taught there's five, and some I'm taught there's seven. And it's like, it's all planet Earth, which is watery and earthy, and it's all there to contain us and nourish us all equally. We're all belonging here. And to me, it's crazy to split us up and, by color, by nationality. Like, in the end of the day, all human beings want love and belonging and connection. Like we're all the same in that way, and we can honor all our different stories. We can obviously like as long as we come from that place where we want to connect with the other, where we want to honor the other, where we want to get to know the other. I don't see what's wrong in appreciating other people's culture. Like, of course, there's a boundary. I know all about this whole cultural appropriation and of course there's a boundary with these things when we want to exploit it for money and stuff like that. Sure, that is a conversation, but not to get into that. What we're talking about in this podcast today is a bit different. It's about how, we don't need to push these narratives where we are splitting each other into, who we are allowed to be or not because of where we came from and if we colonize or were colonized or, like all of this is just pushing that like separation piece. And I feel like we're very much about that connection and just recognizing that we all belong in the end of the day, that we all have these
Yeah,
stories where we've been ripped from our land, put into new land, or needed. Maybe we weren't ripped. Maybe we just needed to go to a new land. Maybe we were just curious what happened to, what's wrong about a person, an individual deciding, oh my God, I want to explore and experience something different. And I think we're allowed to do that as well. It doesn't have to be a huge story of displacement for you to have, the right to desire to explore something new and resettle somewhere. Like it's all about the intentions and how we do things in the end of the day that matters most, I think, when it comes to that as well.
totally. And I think
Yeah.
the time in our time we're moving into a place of more unity, collaboration. Where do we have more connection versus separation? Where are we more alike than different? And I think part of that is letting go of this really black and white, even egotistical, I'm this, you're that. Who are you? Do you fit within my tribe or do you not? And us opening our awareness to understand that we may come from different parts of the world, but we are all human and we all belong because we all
Yeah.
come from the same planet.
It all really depends, I feel, how we approach a conversation with someone. And, someone just telling you you're not allowed to comment because of your skin color can feel weird on either side, I feel, on all the spectrum of all the colors. Because I do believe that if we want to connect and learn from each other, we should be able to do that in peace and not be too afraid of if I'm going to say the wrong word. And like if we're coming with respect, then I feel like, that's felt. And it's important that we share these stories with each other. It's important that each one of us gets to feel that, yeah, we come from somewhere. Um, and that leads me to something, I don't know if it's okay, like to mix it in. We're kind of heading anyways to a little bit of a different direction, but you know, when it comes to like our family systems and our roots, we often do take like unfinished business from our family lineage or unhealed traumas of those who came before us. as a way of showing loyalty in the family system, right? And that's something that we all carry, no matter where we come from. That's something we all have in common, just, carrying these stories in our blood and just what we live through in this life is not out of coincidence or like random. I feel like there's just a lot of connection, right? That like transgenerational connection that we have with our lineages. And yeah, I just felt like mentioning that because in that way we might be all living different experiences. We might all be coming from different stories, but we're all belonging to a family system, which the family system you come from cannot be changed, like biologically. That's where you belong and you come from. So, of course, there's people who are not getting along with their family that might be listening. And um, that's another piece that I think we both bring in a way beyond the family and belonging and our lineage and roots, we're also women who have chosen who are our family also by choice, right? Because we can't change the facts of where we come from, but we can also choose who do we want to belong to, who do we want to go like from here onwards as well, like who am I sharing my heart with, and what new systems can be birthed from the connections that we create with each other. So, yeah, with this, we're gonna take it to our last section of episode 4 here, healing the rupture. And we just wanna begin to close this episode, wrap it up in a way that, like, we can express also why this episode was so important for us to share. And I feel like something I want to express is something that was healing for me was recognition. And it just, for me, healing begins there, just being present with what has been, with what is, seeing the stories of my family members and understanding, and all of this, I bring from my work with family constellations. Like when I was 18, my father passed away. I began my whole journey with like different kind of group modalities like therapy, healing. I really needed to connect to my roots and feel rooted after moving so much. I just had no clue, almost like who I was and where I belonged, and I just really longed for a home. I really had this longing that I just wanted a home, and yeah, acknowledging our roots and knowing where our place is and understanding where we come from, all of that is super healing. So it led me also to the modality of family constellations and trauma healing. And it really just supported me, to also understand that there isn't a family that doesn't have its own traumas and pains and curses, that are carried forward, and that everything that has been lived through my ancestors, through my lineage, is something I don't need to continue carrying, yet I can deeply honor and recognize. And there's this desire usually to give back, and I wanted to share what that is in a way. So we are given life, right? Naomi and I touched on this before, where thanks to all the decisions and all the effort and everything that our ancestors go through, no matter if they're fleeing, right? We cover this. Thanks to them, we are alive. Thanks to our parents, like our mom, our dad, everyone, we are here. And as the younger ones in the system, right, we're not meant to give back to them. We're not meant to look back, right? You can imagine your whole lineage standing behind you and you're facing forward. You're meant to go into your own life and give back life to life. So that's the way to give back and honor, is to create life. And it doesn't have to be literally creating a baby, right? Reproducing. It can also be following your passion, living a life of purpose where you're fulfilling what you came to do as a soul as well. And that can also be a way to give back, but it's living a life of purpose that can be the equivalent to giving a life. right? That's the way to give back. And what we do want to give back, though, by acknowledging the fate and honoring the fate of our ancestors, is exactly that weight that, because we're loyal to our system, because we want to belong deep down, whether it's conscious or, unconscious, which usually it is, we'll be carrying these heavy burdens, right? That are not really ours to carry, that we can definitely, say, Grandma, I honor your fate and I see you and I give this back to you. It doesn't belong to me. And I ask you to see me with good eyes so that I may live my life. Thank you. Like, please bless me so that I may live my own life. And this is just, that's where we then can finally feel that exhale, release the burdens that we may be carrying while still honoring, right, those who came before us, and begin to live our life. Because otherwise, what happens is there's these three orders of love said by Bert Hellinger in Family Constellations. There's belonging, there is place, and there's balance. Basically, meaning that everyone who belongs to the system belongs, everyone has their own place, and it has to be balanced, right? If you are giving, you're receiving. If someone takes, right, like let's say a murderer comes and takes a life, like their life is also in a way going to be taken. Like there has to be some kind of balance. And when one of these are violated, someone in the system is taken as the repairer. And you can observe that in your system. Where are we paying debts that are, they weren't meant for us to pay, that we might have left, well, not we, sorry, that our ancestors might have left. And, again, as from loyalty, we're taking them on. And the system will just, usually the youngest in the system is feeling the most intensely. But any sibling can be, representing a grandfather in some way, repeating the same stories in some way. So yeah, again, we want to recognize and acknowledge so that we can also then move forwards and live our own life and not have to repeat. And of course, like I say for myself, I am the wandering Jew. I kept on moving. I will keep on moving. But I can also reframe this and know that in my life, even though I'm still having this kind of experience and wondering where is home, there's also gifts in that. And also it's coming from a different place, no matter what the experience in these last few years as a Jew has been in this world, you know, um, I'm not running away necessarily when I'm choosing a new home. And the thing that I can take away from being a wandering Jew, of course it has its curse, but there's this wisdom that I feel I received where I can feel belonging anywhere, and where I feel like we bridge between people. You like, you take from here and you bring here, and like there's this richness of culture, and also there's just this reminder of you can find God anywhere and everywhere, and you belong everywhere. And I think that's very beautiful. um yeah, I have always carried that within me. And even like each time I have also unpacked like boxes and left behind parts of me, like languages, and not just languages, and friendships who are like so important and dear to my heart. Like there was a lot of leaving behind, um, and even like things and such. But there was also like a lot of being able to like pick up back all my pieces eventually. And this happened for me when I was 25, and I learned to call all my parts back home, which is something I recommend anyone to do, whether you are traveling and you're just like leaving your house, like whenever you feel you need to come back into your whole piece, your wholeness. It's something I learned to do so I don't feel so fragmented and like lost. And basically, this ritual that my mom taught me is you just state your full name. So I would say, Naomi Judith Ring. I call you back. All of your pieces, please come back to me now. And you just take a moment to visualize all of your pieces from wherever they are, right? So for me, it was like from all these different countries, from all these different timelines, and I call them back into my heart, into my body, and breathe in, and just know that I am fully back. All of me is here with me, and I can carry all of these wonderful bits and pieces of my life story that is so rich with me. Um, yeah. That's that's something that has supported me in finding again a sense of belonging and beyond the borders and rooting, just the acknowledgement, the recognition. Yeah.
That's so interesting that you did that, that you've done that, because I have also in the last 5 years or so had this practice of calling back all my parts. Not so much thinking about places, well, yes, but also
Mm-hmm.
like past, present, future versions of myself in different timelines,
Mm-hmm.
calling
Yes.
myself back in. So that's so cool. And I also recommend this practice because especially, being a very airy person, it's very easy to feel ungrounded. And if you're
Yeah.
feeling ungrounded, like Naomi said, traveling, it is really good. I just feel an instant kind of tether within myself. Um, and I think it's so interesting to hear about this family constellations piece put in this way because yeah, I feel like we inherit certain parcels from our ancestors, um, kind of these packages of evolution, of learning, of growth, things to learn and resolve with. And with my own family system, I have always, similar to you, wanted to find home, like wanted to go home, right? I never identified with living in the United States growing up, visiting family in Brazil. I always felt community belonging and connection when we would visit our Brazilian family.
Yeah.
And ever since I was a teen, I was like, I'm going to live in Brazil because that is where I feel home. And in my 20s, when I was going through my Indian heritage revival, I remember deciding I am going to retrace the trip that was imposed upon my family. I'm going to get on a
Mm.
boat from Trinidad and make the trip back to India and heal that karma that was imposed on my family. And so throughout my life, there's been this desire to go home. And I think that that's a part of my family system as well. And you know, I'm now living in Brazil. Like I have gone back to my mom's home, even though it was her choice to move to Brazil. In some way, I felt like growing up, I was taken away from my mother's homeland. Like I
Mm.
didn't get the opportunity or the choice to grow up Brazilian, which I know it's a me. Not everyone has that within their story, right? As an immigrant growing up in the U.S., like not everyone feels wronged by their parents' immigrant story, but I did. And so now I'm living here in Brazil. I've done the thing that I always wanted to do. I'm now in this place that equals belonging and connection. And as soon as I got here, I realized that that was all a freaking lie, right? I got here and it wasn't this like big hug of people, like this huge crowd of people coming to welcome me home. Like that wasn't the case. It took me like more than a year to find a friend that I could feel at home with here in Ubatuba where I live. And only now am I starting to feel this sense of community. And so when I got here, I realized no, the belonging is me. The belonging is the place that I call home. And I even had a sister here in Brazil who heard my story. She was like, Naomi, you belong in all of those
Mm.
places that you have lived, that your ancestors have lived. All of that is home. And that goes back to this idea that Gaia is our home, right? And so there was a shift that happened to me not long ago, like 10 months ago, where I realized even if I one day leave Brazil, which was never something I conceived of happening, I thought I would move to Brazil and live here forever. That's not the case anymore. I'm not attached to that story anymore. If I were to leave, Brazil will always be my home, and I don't care what anyone thinks if I, am not Brazilian or not or Brazilian enough. So that's kind of how I've ruptured my lineage. And the other thing I wanted to say is that one of my teachers, he is Hawaiian, native Hawaiian, and he is connected to his ancestry for 1,017 generations. And he often says, yeah, imagine having, and they pass on the oral tradition. So he carries the oral tradition of his Hawaiian family for 1,017 generations. And so imagine that, like how rare is that for someone to be the record keeper
Yeah.
of their lineage for that long? And he says so many people come to him being like, oh, but my lineage is broken and I wish I had what you had. And he said this, and I will always remember this: stop talking about your broken lineage. Realize that your ancestors chose you, and you are the carrier of all of these lineages, and you get to bring them together in your way. how you grew up is not a coincidence. Where you grew up is not a coincidence. You were
I agree.
chosen. We were chosen. And we
Yeah.
get to bring forward our story. I
Yeah.
get to merge my Indian great great grandmother with my Trinidadian grandma, with my
Mm.
Brazilian mother, with my, Scottish, living father. Like, I get to piece all of these things together and create a new lineage for my children,
Yeah.
right? A
Oh, that's
new tradition.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I was even gonna ask you at one moment, like, what is a broken lineage? Because for a moment I was like, I don't know if I understand this. Yeah, and then now that you said this, I'm like, oh, okay, I understand why I didn't understand. Because yeah, like but I understand you now more too, like just this feeling of like that, yeah, that moment of break of like we don't get to continue being from where we are from, and like there's just a split, and it feels like something has been taken away maybe, and like you have to carry this like, yeah, I feel like I can understand that, and not just understand, like resonate, because that is what has happened to both of ours in different ways, right? But like I just love what this man said to you. I'm so happy he said this to you because it's so true. We are literally chosen, and that is the way I see it as well. We are chosen to come and heal, and like we have that opportunity. We can take that opportunity to make it mean something different. And I feel that's, yeah, that's wonderful, when we get to um just, yeah, just carry home in our breath and in our body, and mm, in the people, and connect all these pieces, and know that we belong. Like your friend told you, you belong everywhere. You don't need anyone's validation to tell you you're Brazilian enough, or that like, your Indianness is also super. In the beginning, you said like exotic. To me, Indian is so exotic too. Like it's all exotic. It's all exotic. And I see completely the need of retracing those steps to connect. I haven't fully done it on my end, but I lived for 4 years in Turkey, and I have to say I did not feel I belonged at all or welcome. And it was also beautiful, but I could recognize I have parts of this, but it's not my complete, it's not my whole piece. And maybe something like that is what others feel too sometimes when they're, third culture mermaids who are carrying all these bits and pieces, and maybe it's about us making something new out of this, right? Maybe for us as the third cultured mermaids, it's about not a fixed home and a fixed nationality and identity, but just like to become whatever we are becoming and continue in that journey. And you know it's beautiful though to go to your ancestral lands and meet, because you will recover a piece of you, and you will definitely, maybe not. I'm saying definitely. I'm talking like it's a fact. Maybe not, maybe
Yeah.
not, but I think that will still give you a piece of who you are and an understanding deeper of who you are by sometimes knowing who you're not. That's also a
Yeah.
way, you know?
Yeah, and it's interesting too. Like, personally, I've experienced this. We don't have to go back to our ancestral lands in order for our ancestors to speak to us. They'll speak to us
Yeah.
when we're ready. Like,
Yeah.
I was living in California, and my Indian lineage was speaking to me when I was, studying at herb school, and I was working in the Tulsi bed as a gardening apprentice. I was just smelling the Tulsi when I just felt my grandmother speaking to me really subtly. I just knew that there was a connection there with my lineage. And then when I called my father one day and I told him that, he said, "Oh my goodness, I forgot about this until you brought this up, but your grandmother had Tulsi in her garden." And in 2022, when my dad took me to visit Trinidad as an adult, I would go see my distant cousins and they had Tulsi in their garden. And I
That's
was just
beautiful.
remembering that time. So, you know, we don't have to go to these distant lands in order to connect with those bloodlines. Like, they come
Yeah.
to us and we get to let them. come to us, right? We don't have to fix our lineage, but we get to let our lineage fix us just by living, right? Just by
Yeah.
following the little breadcrumbs of what we're drawn to.
Yeah, I agree. And similarly, I have like also, my great grandmother's name was Rose. And she was like Austrian English side, I think. Yeah. Might be the Polish side. Guys, what can I do? Anyways, but she was named Rose, and at some point around, I think it was 2020 and even before, but around 2020, I was very with the rose medicine. Like everything in my life became rose, rose, rose. And it was around that time where, I think I started sharing with my mom like what I would love to call a daughter of mine because one of my nieces was born in 2020. I was 25 and I carried her in my arms and I just felt like for the first time ever this like feminine urge of like I want to have a baby. I'm going to be a mother one day. Like this child just melted in my arms. And from then, I kept on thinking of names. And one day I shared with my mom about Rose, like maybe as a middle name or something. And my mom is very strong about like, don't name your children like for an ancestor. Like, don't give them that kind of karma. So she was like, hold on, you have a great grandmother called Rose? Maybe not. I was like, I do, like there was just I feel like, it's very different obviously from the Tulsi story you brought. But I don't know, it makes sense, that they just speak to us like that there's like essences and medicine that we might be attracted to because there's some kind of connection. There's always connection with what we love, what we are attracted to, even if it's in different ways, right? Like the culture of today is so different from when our ancestors were growing up, and somehow we'll still find similarities and ways that we are carrying them in our blood and in our bones. And not just the curses and the like we said, the burdens, but also the gifts and the medicine. And that is something I want to, like, I feel like for me, I would be complete. I want to leave the listeners with something that I did as a ritual over and over again to receive was to really open myself up to receive all the medicine. And I did this with my parents mostly because I back a few years ago, I really felt like I didn't maybe receive all like the emotional, contention or love. Like there were things that I just felt I was lacking. And I put a pillow behind my back and hugged myself and just imagined I was being hugged by both my parents and allowed myself to open up, breathe and put the intention to open up my body to receive everything that had been transmitted to me, whether it was something I recognized back then or not, whether it was in my love language or not, just to open myself up to recognize and slowly, slowly allow myself to speak, right? And like a loud voice, like to say it out loud, the things that I was feeling that I was receiving from them. And I feel like we could do this with our great grandparents. We could do this with anyone, one person at a time. Just like that pillow is just the presence. And just start to open ourselves and relax the nervous system so that we can recognize what's already living within us that we have received and we are carrying already, and yeah, I just find that very beautiful and it really supported me. I became a whole different person on the other side after that. So, yeah.
That's beautiful. I've loved this episode. I actually feel so complete. How do you feel?
Yeah, same. I think the only intention we had was to like share maybe with each other, but also like mostly leave you guys who are listening, women, beautiful mermaids, with, the question of what makes you feel belonging and connection. I feel like that's a really beautiful question to reflect upon, one that I have in the past few weeks. And yeah, maybe we can just give our answer and just close it that way so that we share also with our listeners, with each other, what makes you feel, for everyone's different. So what makes you feel belonging and connection?
I think now my answer to this question is truly being in the home that I know is, ties all of us together, which is Mother Earth. So being in nature as much as I can, being in the waters,
Mm.
being in the forest, sitting on the rocks, meditating with the fire, like that is when I feel the most like I'm at home.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
beautiful. Yeah. For me right now, what has been coming up most dominantly is where it's when, sorry, I feel a sharing of crying and laughter. So, yeah, just like laughter and crying and just like that kind of communication that rises with people that you just feel at home with, that you feel you can be 100% yourself and share beyond the words without even needing to, know every single detail of why that's happening, but just like that shared laughter and crying together. Moments like that make me truly feel like I belong and a deep sense of connection with another. And yeah, and within, myself, I can for sure say like looking up at the sky, the clouds, the moon, definitely being on the rocks by the river, feeling my feet in the sand and being in the ocean, like all like nature for sure is just the deepest medicine for that as well. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's my
and I think
answer for now.
something you said the other day, which I really want to be said, which is
Hmm.
home with the people that are like my soul brothers, soul sisters, even if
Yeah.
they're not here, right? Like you, Naomi, you're my soul sister and you live in Costa Rica slash Israel, but I still feel at
Yeah.
home every time we're on a call together. And I have a few people in
Oh.
my life who I can say that about. So home is also the people that I call home, regardless of where
Oh.
they are.
Yeah. Thank you so much for saying that. And I'm so happy that I get to, make you feel that way because you definitely make me feel that way. So I'm so blessed to have you and others that I can, feel at home with as well. And yeah, just this has been beautiful. I'm so happy we did this and we brought this forward. And I hope you all enjoy it as well. And yeah, can reflect on your own stories, on your own sense of belonging. Um, and yeah, that you feel the medicine through our sharings.
Thank you so much for joining us in this episode, and we can't wait to see you in the next one.
Yeah. Ciao for now.
Ciao.